Welcome everyone to the 8th annual Debra E. Bernhardt Labor Journalism Forum and Prize ceremony. My name is Michael Conswicks, and I'm the Michael Nash Research Scholar here at the Tamiment Library and Robert F. Wagner Labor Archives at NYU. Tonight's event is a hybrid event, and it's our first program here at BOBE since February 2020. So, thank you. So I want to thank all of you for being here, and of course thank everyone on Zoom for watching us, presumably from their own homes. Things can always change, of course, but we plan on hosting a mix of online and in-person events over the coming months. I want to also thank my colleagues at NYU Libraries and Campus Media for making all of this happen, particularly Tamiment's curator, Shannon O'Neill, for her support, and Liz Varelli and Nicole D'Andrea, who many of you now know through our Zoom events. They manage events here at NYU Libraries. We're proud to host the Bernhardt Forum. As an archivist and public historian, Debra Bernhardt helped make the Tamiment Library and Robert F. Wagner Labor Archives what it is today. And we're happy, as always, to see her family and close friends, along with many others, who have benefited from more than 2 decades of her work in our old space on the 10th floor. For those who don't already know, the Tamiment Library is one of the preeminent sites for research for anyone who's interested in the history of labor and the left in the United States over the last 120 years. Tamiment's origins go back to the early 20th century, but has been part of NYU since 1963. In fact, the 60th anniversary is just next year. Since 1977, we're also the home of the Robert F. Wagner Labor Archives, which includes the records of New York's Central Labor Council, the United Federation of Teachers, and materials from the building trades, communication workers, entertainment, retail, transportation, and public employees, just to name a few. We're also a site for education for all students, not just those who are at NYU. In our classes, we show students the letters, meeting notes, endless meeting notes, photographs, posters, and even jackets to make archival research less intimidating and offer up an entry point to the history of working class movements in the United States. I think it's worth mentioning that I frequently use Debra's New Yorkers at Work oral history collection as a way to introduce students to our entire oral history collections. Again, to use quick and easy primary sources for the classes. I always tell them you will impress your teachers if you do that. So I'll plug Tamiment again later on in the evening, but it is now my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend of Tamiment, the president of the New York Labor History Association, Erwin Yelowitz.
I want to welcome everyone on behalf of the New York Labor History Association. We were founded in 1976, and we're a diverse organization that includes academics, unionists, labor editors, archivists, and people of all types who are interested in labor history and its impact on our lives. And we have programs throughout the year, and we view labor history as a bridge between past and present, and that is our motto. Debra was one of our early leaders, and we honor her memory by co-sponsoring this event annually. If you'd like to join us and participate in our programs, you can visit our website, newyorklaborhistory.org, and you'll find out a lot more about us, find out how to join our organization. Enjoy the evening, and thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Whalen. I'm the Communications Director for the New York City Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO. We are the largest regional labor federation in the country. We represent about 300 unions and 1.3 million workers across New York City. You may know us best from the Labor Day Parade, which we brought back to Fifth Avenue this year with 80,000, thank you. It was our first time back since 2019, and we came back with 80,000 people strong, which is double the size of our last parade, so we're pretty happy about that. The Central Labor Council works in 3 lanes. To do our work, we do politics and legislation, mobilization and organizing, and coalition building. And we are very happy to be a sponsor of this event and to be involved in this every year. We also have a newsletter if people are interested in getting an update every Friday morning at 8 o'clock about all the various goings-on, organizing, campaigns that happen across our New York City unions. You can sign up for our newsletter at nycclc.org. You scroll down, you fill in your name, and I'll send you an email every Friday morning at 8 a.m. So thank you very much for being here.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bernstein, and I'm just going to say briefly that Gary Schoikert from the Metro Labor Communication Council is unable to be here, but they are a co-sponsor. They're an amazing group of labor journalists in all mediums and put on terrific conferences, some of which have featured some of the people who are on the program tonight. So Labor Arts is the last sponsor we're going to mention tonight, which was one of the last big projects I worked on with Debra Bernhardt. It was founded in the year 2000, and the idea was that images and art are a fantastic way to communicate about working class history. So we have an online museum, a series of exhibits, and we also do things in real life, including a contest called Making Work Visible for CUNY students. If you know any, there are $1,000 prizes, and the deadline is the end of this month. Let them know. We honor women who have been lifelong activists with the Clara Lemlich Awards in the spring, and we encourage you to make nominations. We have a program called Connecting Activists, where we arrange for teenagers to interview lifelong activists, which has been a remarkable experience from both ends of the spectrum. We collaborate with the Museum of the City of New York, with the Tamiment Museum, with everybody who sponsored this here tonight. And this year we've been especially busy celebrating something with almost a dozen events. 40 years ago, 20,000 immigrant women garment workers in Chinatown won an extraordinary victory. And it's a story that we want everybody to remember. It's a good moment to remember it. So there's an exhibit at Columbia University, which I urge you to go to, and there's an event next week, which I invite you to, and there'll be flyers in the back. I now have the great pleasure of welcoming Debra's family. John and Miriam are here, and they're, I think, is Sonia here? Sonia Bernhardt Bloom is a Spanish-English translator, museum educator, and researcher who graduated from Oberlin College in 2018 with majors in Spanish and Latin American studies. She spent a year working and living in Buenos Aires, another year as a museum educator at the New York Historical Society. She's currently working at the National Yiddish Book Center in Amherst from her home in Brooklyn. She is a little bit under the weather, and therefore her brother, Alexander Bernhardt Bloom, will be speaking on both of their behalves. Alex is a teacher, writer, reverent son, and euphoric new father, and we are thrilled that his next generation son is here with us tonight. A career educator, native New Yorker, he spent his most recent years living in Spain, this spring making his return to begin a master's program at CUNY's Craig Newmark School of Journalism, where our moderator, Tom Robbins, is a key figure, and arriving anew to Brooklyn, where he lives with his wonderful wife and their small son, who holds 2 passports. So, Alex.
Hi. So I'm Alexander Bernhardt Bloom. Debra Bernhardt was my mother. And I was meant to speak together with my sister here tonight, but she couldn't make it, unfortunately. So I'm going to hold the reins, and we'll hope for a different year. doing it together. So I was charged with sharing a bit about my mother and who she was, and also explaining the creation of the award and where it came from. So I'm going to do my best to do that here. Why was this award created? First of all, the creation wasn't ours, my family's or mine, but a lovingly developed project of Rachel Bernstein, who's a great friend and colleague of our mother's and who has succeeded to advance the work she did and they did together in many ways since Debra's death in 2001. Debra Bernhardt was the head archivist at Tamiment before then, Robert F. Wagner Labor Archives, here on the 10th floor of this building. And for all of mine and Sonia's childhood, the reading room, not this one, but the one that was on the 10th floor, the reading room was a familiar place to us before we could read. Before arriving to Brooklyn and the West Village was first Iron River, the town in Upper Michigan where she had her roots, my mom. Sonia and I, too, from Fallen Apples. She came from a family of educators and local historians, community activists who lived in a town with a strong working people's culture. Iron River, a town concentrated on an industry with a prevailing appreciation for the hands that kept it in motion. Friends and family were miners of iron ore, and her parents were high school teachers who later undertook a project to open a local history museum largely dedicated to the labor heritage of the town. When Debra left to study in downstate Michigan and begin her eventual journey to New York City, she carried the perspective she developed in this place and the principles of the historians, educators, and community and working people's champions she knew there. All right, so that's on my mom. These perspective and principles are in great evidence in the work she did thereafter and are the basis of the award that we're celebrating here tonight. So, the award, we could say, is made in honor of a couple of different principles. First, my mother's dedication to telling working people's stories. She was an archivist, but also an active historian, and collected especially oral histories from working people, a great many of great examples of which are collected in hers and Rachel's Ordinary People, Extraordinary Lives, now available in paperback. Next, my mother's dedication to celebrating the telling of working people's stories, live and in person, in big groups with wine and cheese after. These were the gatherings that I recall very vividly from when I was about my son's age and afterwards. This archives, Tamiment, was to be a place of buzzing activity, populated with researchers and agitators, the subjects of their research alike, and open events to bring interested people together around the histories maintained here. Finally, this is connected with a third reason for the award. My mother's belief in the effective use of history gathering and remembrance for inspiring current activism. Mourn the dead and fight like hell for the living. Y'all remember that one? Sort of like that, but a little less morbid, that the act of recording, organizing, preserving, and presenting working people's history was a way to advance the cause for a more socially just and righteous society. Historian, archivist, and activist is how we can deem her. So the idea then is that my mother's legacy and mission as a radical historian will be here extended through encouragement for those continuing to do this work. That's what we're doing here tonight. We have excellent examples in the program this evening, in the event organizers, in the members of tonight's panel, and Molly Crabapple, whose article on New York City taxi drivers' organized activism won this year's prize. These are all excellent examples of people who are in their work carrying on my mother's legacy brilliantly. We could say that the event is a call on all of you to keep doing what you're doing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was perfect. One correction, it wasn't my idea. I've been working on it for all these 8 years, but I think it was actually Jane Latour's idea when the New York Labor History Association friends were sitting around thinking, how can we make a living memorial and what should it look like? This is what we came up with. So is Molly here? Yes, yay, good, okay. The entries this year were impressive. They are more so every year, which we're thrilled about. And to give you a taste of the range, we had especially trenchant pieces on the legacy of the Chicago teachers' strike 10 years on deed theft and Black Jewish tensions in Crown Heights, on the devastating deaths of immigrant workers in the New York City construction industry, on labor organizing in Mississippi, and on the complexities of being an activist journalist and a labor feminist in the timber workers union of the 1930s. So the 6 of us on the prize committee had a fascinating summer of reading all over the place. Molly Crabapple's story about the New York City taxi drivers stood out to us all. Co-published by The Nation and the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, it most effectively furthers the understanding of the history of working people, in the words of the call for entries, and honors Debra's mission of sharing these stories that are all too often unknown. That's one of the things about the kind of history and the kind of archives that Debra was committed to, is that it didn't really count if nobody knew about it. So keeping things safe is good, but making sure people know the stories is essential. So they're both essential. So the story of the taxi workers' victory didn't get a flood of coverage. I don't know how many people remember it, and wasn't something most New Yorkers who weren't labor historians knew about. And neither was the complicated and very misguided set of financial decisions that formed the backdrop of this dramatic tale. So Crabapple's clear and dramatic prose draws us in immediately with, of all things, statistics. But these are statistics that let the reader directly understand individuals. And I'm just going to quote briefly from the introduction. 94% of cab drivers are immigrants. 95% are men. But there are few other commonalities among them. Cabbies represent almost every race, religion, and country of origin. They speak over 120 languages. They spend their days isolated in their cabs, competing for a dwindling number of fares. Yet for decades, the New York Taxi Workers Association, a 21,000-member union of cab, livery, and rideshare drivers, had shrewd organizing, ferocious solidarity, and cabbies had moved the city. This is a story of how they did it. And she goes on to find that balance. She tells us these vivid personal stories. Her written portraits of key players in the taxi workers are accompanied by these extraordinary illustrations. I think they're ink and watercolor, but Molly will tell us more, that bring the story to life in a much richer way. She finds that balance, which to me is always the key to great journalism and to great history, which is on the one hand honing in on personal stories that evoke your empathy and lead you to understand people as human beings, and on the other hand, giving us the critical context. And she gives us both. She tells us about the industry, about the way profiteering on the part of both the city and the financial institutions led to huge debts for drivers, some of which were kind of conned into signing up for those debts, to own taxi medallions. Ride-sharing companies came along and made it much worse. Her reporting about the protests and the hunger strike is rich, at least in part because of her methods. She was often there on the street with the drivers as the story played out. it wasn't until after we had selected this article and announced this prize that I belatedly, I can't believe it was this late, discovered what an extraordinary career Crabapple has had, making art and reporting stories from around the globe. I urge you all to take a look at her website and find out more about her. This great story about taxi drivers is only the tip of the iceberg. But we are thrilled to give the Debra E. Bernhardt Prize for Labor Journalism to Molly Crabapple. So,
My God, what an honor to be here, and thank you so much for such a warm and beautiful introduction. As someone who is an obsessive nerd about archives myself and who has spent a lot of time in the Tamiment Library, like a witch at her spinning wheel going through the bobbins of microfilm, I can't tell you how it warms my heart to be celebrating this here. So before I get in, I just want to thank a few people. First, I want to thank the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. Lisa Quart is back there. They helped fund and co-publish this piece, and without their support, I never would have been able to spend the months that I spent visiting the camp over and over again, marching alongside the drivers, going on hunger strike with the drivers, and really getting inside the stories and getting to know the people involved. So at a time when funds are really being cut for journalism, Economic Hardship Reporting Project makes a lot of deep and rich reporting possible. I'm very grateful. I also want to thank The Nation, which published this piece as a cover story, and my editor, Lizzie there, who is one of the sharpest, smartest, and most merciless with a red pen editors that one could ask for. But most of all, I want to thank the New York Taxi Workers Alliance and their and their visionary leader, Debra E, one of the greatest labor organizers I've ever had a pleasure to meet. Debra E founded the New York Taxi Workers Alliance in 1991, I believe, out of sheer grit, idealism, and shoe leather, pounding the pavements, hanging out at garages, and meeting with organizing workers and listening to them. She took an industry that people didn't even think could be organized, and she organized it. She's a great woman, and without her insight and her cooperation, this piece never would have existed. I also want to thank the drivers, some of whom I see here, like Mohammed Tipu Sultan. Tipu? You might recognize him as the cover model. He's often on the back of a taxi with a bullhorn in one hand, saying that these streets of New York are ours. So thank you, Tipu. And thank you to every other driver who spoke to me. Some of the toughest, coolest, funniest men and women I've ever had the pleasure to meet. And yeah, without them, there wouldn't even be a story. So big gratitude. Driver power. And thank you taxi drivers for showing us what it looks like to win. So I'm not much for these long speeches, but I've been told that I should not recap my article and that instead I should tell some stories, some memories from the piece that maybe didn't make it in. My first memory is I heard about the strike, the hunger strike and the protest encampment because a local politician I follow, Zohran Mamdani, was tweeting about it. He was at the event from the first days, and I just lived a few blocks away, and it was midnight, and I came down. There were 3 guys sitting on plastic chairs in the middle of the desolate financial district, and one guy was from Ghana, one guy was from Pakistan, one guy was from Flushing, Queens, and they were all just joking and goofing around like brothers. And when I think about what it felt like to cover this story, that's what I remember most, that brotherhood and sisterhood, that sense of family. People from every part of the world, from every background, every kind of belief, even from countries that, fought wars against each other, whatever, but they together here, they were workers and they were fighting as brothers and sisters together. And that is something
that can inspire all of us. Another memory I have is I did a lot of portraits of the drivers, and I would give them prints. I would bring them by the site, and the guys would put them in the windows of their cabs when they shut down the Brooklyn Bridge. And this is cooler than any art gallery, any museum in the world. Having your art used in actual action. I remember Tipu over there. I remember him climbing on top of the cab and saying that this was their city, that drivers moved the city, that the streets belonged to them and the city belonged to them, and that no one, no hedge fund guy, no politician, no Brett from Connecticut, no one could take that away from them because it's their city. It's their work that moved it. A third memory. This is the night they won. They had been on hunger strike for weeks, and hunger strike's really hard. I did one day of hunger strike with them, and then I broke. So it's very hard, but these guys were on strike for weeks, and some of these people were older people. And I was so scared the whole time, because even though the drivers had done everything right, I was so used to the good people losing. I was so used to the politicians, the hedge fund people, to money, to power, crushing people, no matter how good they were, no matter how good they fought. And I was scared that that was what was going to happen. I was so scared. And I remember what it felt like that night when Baravi announced that the debts, $200,000 of the debts are going to be canceled. And when everyone just hugged each other with such relief, like they had just gotten their life back. And I remember there were speakers with Bollywood music, and everyone was dancing, and the music was so loud it felt like it would touch the skyscrapers. And that was what winning looked like. I remember what winning looked like and winning felt like that night. Later, after it was all over, I interviewed Baravi for a recap of what had happened. And I asked her if she had always known that they would win. And she told me that, she said that, of course she had. Losing wasn't an option. She said the problem was that the left had gotten used to losing. And what they needed was they needed to know that they could win. So thank you to Baravi, thank you to Tipu, and thank you to the drivers, and thanks so much for this award. I'm very grateful.
Congratulations, that was wonderful. I want to introduce Tom Robbins, who is an esteemed journalist and on the faculty at the CUNY Grad School of Journalism. And he's going to introduce our extraordinary panelists, whom we all hope will have another victory in the near future.
Okay, thank you, Rach. Why don't you folks come on up? Jocelyn and Matt and Claire, join us up here. I'm going to join you too when I grab this mic. I like what Molly Crabapple just said, that you got to get more used to winning. And here are three people who are doing everything they can to try to win. You know, like if you're as tired as I am of reading those annual stats about the slip in labor union membership and then hearing that they're starting to tick up again, you know, well, here are the folks who are like making that happen. And it's a hard slog, which you guys are going to tell us how hard it is. I'll sit down with you if I can. You promised to help me get this thing out of here, whoever you are. Who is that? All right. Let's just start by talking a little bit about what you did. Jocelyn, I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to do my best. You say it for me. Chukianki. I apologize. I was ready to do it. Jocelyn Chukianki was a Starbucks employee for 7 years. And she was working as a shift supervisor, and she was fighting for a union at her Great Neck, Long Island shop when she got fired on July 27th of this year. Her crime was tardiness. She was as much as 2 or 3 minutes late on some occasions to her shift. But it most likely had more to do with the fact that she was a leader in her union than anything to do with 2 or 3 minutes. And her union was affiliated with Workers United, which is an affiliate of SEIU. Is that right?
Yes,
Right.
that's correct.
Okay. And next to Jocelyn is Claire Chang, who's worked at REI. What does REI stand for? Remind me.
Recreational Equipment, Inc.
Oh, okay. You know, I just see the REI. I can never remember what it stands for. But she worked at that great REI store in Soho for 5 years, and she's currently a visual presentation specialist at that location. And she's a current member of the organizing committee as well as the bargaining committee, because the folks at her shop voted overwhelmingly. It was 88 to what, 14?
Yep, 88 to 14.
Yeah, to
86%.
join a union, you know. And they're affiliated with RWDSU, Retail Wholesale Store Department. Matt Cusick is an Amazon worker, an organizer. He's a former member of the Amazon Labor Union in Staten Island. He was a lead organizer in their organizing committee, and he did stuff like producing the newsletter, the campaign website, a whole lot of stuff, online shop, posters, flyers, buttons, all the stuff you need, and Spanish translations, not bad. And like Jocelyn, Matt, for his trouble, was fired by Amazon days after the second election campaign in May. And so he had to leave the Amazon Labor Union, but he's still pitching in and supporting the Amazon organizing drive nationwide, putting together organizing guides and other materials. Let's just start with like what brought each of you to your organizing drives. Was it your intention, Jocelyn, when you went to work at Starbucks that I want to start a union here?
Well, no. Originally, I started off as a college student, and I just needed a job. But, you know, as the years went by and I noticed how Starbucks started treating their employees, it felt like everything I had said was of no value. Every single time I complained to a manager or district manager or to HR, everything I said was kind of swept under a rug. And so when the Buffalo store in upstate New York won their union, I started becoming more interested in what is a union, because it really is something that I didn't really know about until then. And in December, they won their union.
Right.
And that is when I started looking into unionizing. And, you know, it really, like, forming a union was just this concrete way of just getting all the ideas I had, like, they already existed. Like, there was a concrete way for, like, there to be a contract in order to take care of the workers, the baristas, who are there on the floor every day. And I just decided it would be a really good idea. And so did everyone else. I wasn't alone on this idea. And we started our campaign from there.
For you. Claire, what was it at REI that led you to want to get involved in the union drive?
So talks about kind of organizing a union was not so serious before the pandemic, but it was really the pandemic that really sharpened all that for us. We were, in March of 2020, REI had closed their doors, and all the employees were furloughed for approximately 3 months, depending on your position. And coming back to the store at Soho, the Soho location specifically, we had anywhere between 140 to 150 workers typically, and we came back with about less than 90. So we had a lot of folks who were actually laid off at that time. So that was a big inspiration for not only just that, but it's just like coming back to the store during such a precarious and tumultuous time. There were a lot of unknowns with the pandemic. This was literally like July-ish of 2020, and coming back to just the company not really living up to their stated values. That really urged us to start to consider how we can be taken more seriously, you know, and have our safety and our health and safety taken more seriously. We had actually started conversations in October of that year, and then realized very quickly that we, after some conversations, it wasn't a single issue sort of like campaign that we should embark on, because, you know, COVID was the main issue that we saw. But the more we talked, we saw that there were so many things like scheduling, wages, all that stuff. And we saw forming a union to be the solution to, or like, you know, starting to think about that, like that would be a solution that would be more long lasting and something that we can establish together.
Matt, what was your experience? What led you to jump into union organizing?
So I joined Amazon to organize. So I was, when the pandemic hit, I was in New York at a graduate program for publishing and journalism at the New School, and the school shut down. I was trying to start a bilingual journal dedicated to arts and culture and politics and organizing and activism around the idea of the commons. So it's to be called Commoner. Hopefully I'll get back to that someday. But the school shut down, the city shut down, and so I went back to where I had been before, which was Mexico. And I was working, I dropped out of the program, and I was working online as an editor, but I felt kind of detached from everything. So I came back to New York last year in the summer of June, and I was looking for a project to get involved in. The team for the journal had been scattered to the winds. And so I was talking with brand workers here in New York, great organization, and they were doing a salting campaign with an industrial bakery in the city, and I was interested in that. I had been doing a lot of organizing and activism in my life, mostly around education. I've been a teacher for a long time, but not labor activism specifically, because my sense was, you know, the labor movement at this point had become very weakened, and was, you know, what was left of it was very bureaucratized. You know, it wasn't, yeah, I'm a pretty politically radical person, so it didn't seem like the place where I could do that sort of work. But then as I started to see that there was sort of this upsurge of a new kind of organizing going on, a lot of independent movements coming out. Brand Workers is doing a different, you know, I mean, it's not new, but these things have, you know, come back into vogue that, you know, have not been that strong for a long time. But you know, one of the things was they wanted to do secret salting, like not tell other coworkers that you were there to organize, and that didn't sit well with me. So I, you know, thought about, well, this is an interesting idea. Where else could I go and do this? And I'd been following Bessemer, Alabama, and been following, you know, I read the New York Times had a big expose about Amazon, which featured Derek Palmer, who's the vice president of the ALU at the time, and is again now. And I thought, well, you know, that's a campaign that seems like a long shot, you know, but if they have a chance at all, it seems like they're going to need all the help that they can get. And if they have a chance at all, then that would definitely be the best use of my time, because this is like this company that people think is unorganizable, you know, ununionizable. And I don't think it is, you know, but if we could prove that, if we could just win once, like that just one win would make such a difference. So I, you know, tried to get in touch, you know, and they didn't get back to me, and so I thought, well, they definitely need help if they're not even, you know, returning emails. So I just got a job there, and day one went to their tent and said, hey, I want to organize with you guys.
Okay, all right, a man on a mission. I like that. All right.
I don't think they wanted me, actually. It's the thing I learned later, but we can get into that.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about, I mean, you guys were, you know, you became stalwarts, each one of you, in this union drive. But what was your sense, Jocelyn, of the other workers at the Starbucks where you were there? Was that a tough thing to try to persuade them, or did they come to the same realization more or less as you did?
Actually, originally, most people, I had gone in like very slow. I started talking to like, I think one person who had been at the store for a very long time, because I had just transferred over to this store in Great Neck. And because I wanted to hear everyone else's opinions, and I've heard like whispers about it, but I hadn't known like what people's actual thoughts were when we first started organizing. And so I asked him, and there was no one else in the store other than the other two baristas, and he kind of just yelled, "Hey, you guys would vote yes to a union, right?" And I was like, "We were supposed to be quiet, but it's okay." So after hearing their like very quick yeses and answering questions, because at this point I had done some research about what it means to be in a union, I started talking to other people, and the majority of people at my store said that they would vote yes. And then we had 100% union card signed.
100%.
100%. But then we ended up losing our vote due to intense union busting at our store. So originally, yes, 100%, and then we lost 5 to 6.
And they wore you down. Okay, you tell us about that terrible thing in a moment. Claire, was there a wildfire at REI among the people where everybody sort of liked the idea? Like, what?
So I was one of the folks who initiated conversations in the very beginning. As some organizers would know, we go through like a mapping session. So, I mean, this was before I knew anything about that, but I was just like, let me just approach people that I already have a relationship with and I know personally would most likely be down to at least talk about it. So we started with a very small group. Again, like when we came back, it was probably around 80 something. Staff-wise, like total staff-wise. So I approached maybe like 5 or 6 other people, and then we just got together after work one day. We went to Washington Square Park, and we're like, all right, let's just like talk about it. I don't know, does anyone have any experience organizing a union? Does anyone know anything about this? And the answer was a resounding no. So we're like, okay, let's do research first. So that's how we first got started. And probably just like a couple months later, we had set up like, just a way to chat with one another, because we had all been in different departments in the store. And for those who are unfamiliar with REI, at least in this location, we have 3 different floors. We all kind of like work in our own departments. So we, there's a possibility that people may not see each other. Like, for example, if you're working in the footwear department, you may not really see someone who works in the camp department very frequently. So we kind of set up our own little thing. Like, we just like made a group chat basically, and just kind of like shared things and shared articles with one another to like inspire each other and be like, yeah, I think this is possible. We've seen it happen historically. So maybe this is a time, because again, it was a very new and kind of scary time to be in at that point. Yeah. But yeah, so we just started off with like, I started off with like, people who I was comfortable with and like trusted to at least not leak it if they weren't into the idea. And then once we got in touch with RWDSU and got in touch with like staff organizers, they kind of like showed us the ropes with mapping, and then we just kind of spent the year of 2021 doing that, and then assessing like where we were. We never got to 100% with our cards, but we got a supermajority sign on to cards first, and then did the inoculation, kind of secured that, and even increased our support after we went public, which was really
You mentioned
amazing.
the word scary, I mean, it is scary, right?
Yeah, very, very much so, because you're kind of putting your job on the line. Like, we all knew that when we had these conversations that it was likely not going to be acceptable, despite the public image of the company being like kind of more on the progressive side and everything, and but yeah, we just knew that like, probably best not to, tell a manager about this,
Not yet,
so.
anyways. Jocelyn, was there fear in your shop as well in terms of persuading people? People are scared about what's going to happen. We do a union. Is this a smart thing to do?
I think eventually there was that, because then we used to hear things about like, oh, you could lose these benefits, or you're gambling away these benefits if you were to unionize. For me, I was like initially like worried that if because I knew I was going to be definitely one of the leaders in my organizing committee. So I was afraid of losing my job. I've had this job for 7 years.
Right.
I needed the flexible schedule and like the benefits that, like at the time, like I thought I needed all these benefits that that it came with, but I just thought that unionizing was way more important at that time, like, or even now, currently, I still think, obviously, that unionizing is way more important and just having rights within the workplace. But yeah, I guess there was some fear eventually. At first, I don't think people saw it, and then it set in, definitely.
Right, and then they came after you. Matt, you were there to help inspire people and not try to talk through their fear if they were scared. How did you deal with that with Amazon workers?
Yeah, well, I mean, fear is definitely the number one weapon, I think, that all union busters are going to use, and definitely Jeff Bezos, Amazon, uses that in a number of ways. You know, one of the things about Amazon, you know, the old saw about unionizing, union organizing is that the boss is the best organizer. And, you know, in terms of bosses being the best organizer, Jeff Bezos is the best boss. You know, everything that he says just gets workers angry. Everything that every management decision that they make makes workers angry, and the sheer depravity of the management system that they have means that workers already have something to fear. There's a 150% annual turnover rate at Amazon. 3% of workers are lost every week, and this is by design. You know, they set these quotas at an unsustainable rate that get people, tens of thousands of people injured every year, but also, you know, it's hard to keep up, especially if you have any sort of injury or disability at all, and they're really bad about accommodations, all these things. They play tricks with the numbers, all these things. They have quotas to fire people. You know, managers have talked about hiring to fire. They just bring people in just so that they can kick people out because they have to kick a certain number of people out. So this was job security is one of the biggest things that Amazon workers worry about. They're always worried about losing their job because at any moment you could lose your job. Their time, you know, your time off is unpaid time. You have, you know, a certain number of hours. Every time you take some of those hours, you're getting closer to getting kicked out because when you get to negative, you're done. So yes, I would never try to deny people's, you know, legitimate fear that, you know, there's a risk in organizing. There is.
Right.
But there's a risk in not organizing.
Right.
And it's actually greater. You know, the only way that we could stop 150% annual turnover, these quotas, you know, this management system that has no input from workers is for workers to organize and unionize. So we have to take a risk to reduce that risk.
Right. Right. Rachel, give me a high sign when we need to go to questions. But I can keep going for a while here with the discussion for a bit. No, we're gonna watch. Okay, good. You know, one of the things that strikes me as interesting is that, like, the three firms that all of you work with or have worked with are kind of self-identified with the public as good guys in one way or another. You know, Amazon talks about partners, right? They don't talk about employees, Starbucks. Right? You know, Starbucks talks about partners.
Amazon's are associates.
Associates, partners. You know, the idea of employees and workers, that's out the door. REI it's a co-op of some kind, right? People.
It's a consumer co-op.
Right.
Yes.
People buy memberships there, right? Yeah. Right, and they trade on their brand, which is associated though with, you know, good living, clean, you know, good guy stuff.
What is it? The motto is, life outdoors is a life well lived.
All right. And yet, each one of these, well, you have to tell us about what management response is at REA, but at least at Starbucks and at Amazon, management has come down with a hammer on folks who were trying to do it. Jocelyn, what happened? What did management do once you folks all decided you wanted to join the union?
So when they found out, they started having like these meetings with people, like kind of one-on-one or maybe in small groups where they would talk about what their version of being in a union means and how we could be gambling everything away and how we could lose our ASU, which is our college-based like tuition program that Starbucks does. We could lose Spotify. We could lose our health benefits, and just.
Wait, what's the Spotify? You mean you're going to lose your subscription to Spotify or something? You're
Yes,
gonna
you get a
pull the
free
plug?
subscription to Spotify, and that was threatened. It was on the line. You know,
Okay.
Spotify over, you know, health and safety.
Right. But they had a few other hammers they used on you, like you wouldn't be able to transfer to other places.
Oh yeah, we wouldn't be able to transfer to other places. We would not be able to get promoted if we were in a unionized store. So they would kind of pick out where the reasons why people came to work at this store. They picked out people's vulnerabilities, and then they kind of just emphasize on those things. So some people came to the store to be promoted, and other people needed a transfer. Also, in order to be promoted, you have to transfer. If you're a shift manager, in order to become a manager, you would have to go to a different store. And that made it like impossible for them to ever get promoted. They also said that if every store in the district was to get a raise, our store would not get that. And and they just kept inciting fear in all of these people, and unfortunately, they believe them. And it makes sense when you're talking to someone one-on-one and being like, and this person is like directly like above you, or your district manager or whoever else. They incited fear, and it worked, unfortunately.
And it worked.
Yeah.
Right. Those one-on-one meetings were effective.
Yeah, or I think a lot of what they did was try to discredit me and like the information they had. Like
Really?
It was.
You seem like a very nice person. What could they say about you?
Oh, they would just say that, if we were to unionize, then no one would be allowed to talk to the manager, and that they would have to come and talk to the steward only for like things like shift switches and like availability, like things that your manager would do, and it would have to be me. Like they said all these things, and then they said that someone said that it was implied to them by a district manager that the union was paying the people in Buffalo thousands of dollars to start a union, and they implied that I was also getting thousands of dollars to start a union in Great Neck, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I was like, I called the union, was like, where are my thousands of dollars?
Where's my money?
Where's my money? Obviously it didn't exist, but yeah.
Claire, how did REI management respond with your overwhelming vote?
Before, when we went public, or with our vote?
Well, when you went public.
Yes. So kind of like how I mentioned earlier, we thankfully were never found out before we decided to go public ourselves, which was quite a feat, I think.
Yeah.
But that allowed us time to properly inoculate the staff who were pro-union for what to expect once we go public, because we had to prepare for the worst, even though some people still wanted to believe that REI would not engage in union busting. In inoculation, and this is what played out exactly, there were usually 3 things that you can expect, and that's misinformation, emotional appeal, and kind of like this give us another chance kind of deal. And all 3 of those things were employed. Once we went public, literally just like, we went public on a Friday, so they had to deal with it over the weekend, I'm assuming. And then the following week, almost immediately, we started seeing high-level executives being flown into the store. All of a sudden, we're getting a lot of management support. We started having captive audience meetings during like the AM and the PM, and they employed those tactics. So basically, trying to appeal to us emotionally. A lot of managers seemed like they were taking it personally. There was a lot of misinformation, which led to fear-mongering. So again, it goes back to that fear that Jocelyn and Matt had talked about. It was a lot of just instilling doubt in our coworkers, and basically, it was almost like threatening. Well, yeah, it's kind of like threatening that we're gonna lose the good things that we have currently if we proceed with this vote. And then ultimately, towards the end, like a few days before our vote, we had a high-level executive literally ask us in a captive audience meeting to vote no. in the election. But obviously that didn't work,
Didn't work.
so.
Didn't work?
Yeah.
That's terrific. All right. And what's the status now? Just quickly, Claire, where are you're trying to get a contract? What is your?
Yes, so probably about a week after our election, we were certified, so now, thank you. And yeah, we've started to meet with our employer at the bargaining table. And, you know, we're still in the early days of that.
All right, all right.
So hopeful to win a good contract.
All right. Well, Matt, you could probably write a book on Amazon's. They have sort of mastered the Jeff Bezos idea. You've given us a taste of the kind of things they did. But let me ask you about just how effective you thought it was. I mean, there's obviously they've won in some places, you know, and there's a union drive is going on. What do you see down the road? Where are things headed at Amazon?
Well, they keep on escalating, and they have nearly limitless funds, so they can always continue to escalate. I think early on they drastically underestimated. I think everybody did. The ability of workers to self-organize and win an election. I think very few people believed that it was possible, and so I think that underestimation gave us a lot of opening, and then. Then they realized how close it was actually going to be. They got panicked. They did a lot more stuff, and then we won, and they went, we had a second election right after that, and they went full on, much smaller building, but even more resources. They were bringing in people from all over the country. They got this hotel that right down the street, and just basically packed full of Amazon consultants and Amazon employees from elsewhere. Who were all over this building, spreading rumors, scaring people, doing stuff that's like definitely illegal, like telling people to take off ALU shirts and put on Vote No shirts, like very blatant stuff. They just sort of took the mask off near the end. They call the police on ALU organizers all the time. In the second election, they'd bring the security guard out many, many times a day because we had set up our table right in front of the building. To catch everybody coming in and out. And they'd check badges on everybody, and anybody who wasn't an Amazon worker had to leave. So we had lots of volunteers who would leave until the person went back in and they could come back out. And it was just a cat and mouse game. But then they started talking, this has been very public in national news and stuff about how they're planning to roll back their expansions. And so a lot of whole warehouses are on the chopping block, and so this is a new thing that Amazon workers have heard and are very afraid about. That even if we unionize, it's quite possible that winning an election will mean Jeff Bezos says kill the whole warehouse, like what they're doing with Starbucks. The thing is, I read a union busting manual written by some lawyers from the 1950s, and it was like, wow, nothing has changed. It was the exact, all of the stuff. They have not evolved really in 70 years. But those things are like, they found the science of it. Those things are quite effective. If you do them enough, you can really put the fear in people.
Right. I'll ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for folks from the audience who want to say things. I'm curious, there's been media on each one of your campaigns. Jocelyn, how does the coverage been for you? Has it been helpful? Has it been hurtful? Did us guys in the media, did we do a bad job, a good job? What do you think?
Well, I think for just from starting organizing for me, it started with journalism. So we had customers who would come in and give us newspaper clippings of what was happening in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And after Buffalo won, it was the same thing. We would get newspaper coverage over it, and it would just be the pieces of Buffalo Starbucks winning. And then after when we became public, the people in press and media really helped amplify my voice and amplify the people whose voices don't really get heard often. So it has been amazing, and all the reporters I've talked to have been really, really kind and very, I guess, just understanding. So it's actually just amplified our voices. So.
Claire, did you others say? I mean, there's a lot of stuff when REA voted. I saw NPR. Everybody was on the case. Was that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of like what I had mentioned earlier, it was a big source of inspiration for us in the earlier stages of our campaign, and continues to inspire the bargaining unit now till this day. Like, you know, we talked a lot about the Starbucks organizing efforts and the win in Buffalo, and all the other you know, stores that started to go public and have all these wins and everything. And we talked a lot about Amazon. We talked about the Bessemer campaign and the Staten Island campaign and everything. So we are definitely like keeping an eye out and like basically sharing videos, articles, all that stuff that like really keeps the fire burning for us. And yeah, and it's also been very helpful actually, in my opinion, having REI be mentioned along big names like Starbucks and Amazon, because you know, REI is not as huge as Starbucks and Amazon, but I guess we kind of fall into that whole like progressive company like you know, grouping. I mean, it's not unknown, but you know, usually it's a little bit more niche because you have to be into the outdoors. Otherwise, you might think it's called Ray, you know. So yeah, it's definitely been very helpful to kind of like, you know, have the company feel a little pressure and heat too, you know. And again, I think that their public image matters a lot to them. Yep. So they probably don't want to appear like Starbucks and Amazon and what those companies are very publicly doing to their workers.
Yeah, it's wonderful. You guys are sort of ping-ponging off each other and drawing courage and drawing strength from each other's victories. Matt, I mean, Amazon's been the biggest story in terms of, you know, it's the biggest company in town, and what happens there is going to matter. Did the huge media coverage, what was the impact there on your organizing work?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit more critical than the other two. You know, obviously publicity is important, and you know, I came to the organizing effort because I learned about it through media, and a lot of help that came to us afterwards came through media. But there were, you know, putting my editor hat on for a second, I would say, you know, I did have actual arguments with a number of writers, journalists about their stories. You know, and they often said, you're right, but they didn't, you know, they still wrote the story they wrote. So I'm gonna take out some notes here, real quick.
Uh-oh.
Okay. I'm gonna run down these real quick. They all end up starting with a C. That was just coincidental. But the first thing that, the first issue, I'm just being critical because why not put that note out there, is collectivity. So, you know, there were a lot of stories that were, you know, nothing against Chris Smalls, but there were a lot of stories that were all about one person. And not just in the Staten Island campaign. You know, once Matt Luttrell in Kentucky took off, it was just Matt Luttrell, and I was like, where is the rest of the organizing? Like, there are a lot of stories going on, and it's one person. And these critical points are not just so that I can get this off my chest, but I also think it's because journalists, and labor journalists in particular, have a pedagogical responsibility, that a lot of new organizers coming into organizing are going to know what they know through what they can read in the press. And so when you know, you drop the ball on certain things, it has an impact. You know, so Matt Luttrell didn't know about this sort of collectivity because what he had been reading about was Chris Smalls, the celebrity. So you know, that, and I want to say also that Molly's article does not violate any of these. Very high marks. She did an excellent job. But she did show, you know, there's a number of different organizers and people who are not officially organizers, but are essential to the organizing effort going on, and brought in how all of that goes together, and that's really important. The second thing I would say is context. You know, a lot of times, you know, you get a real superficial, you know, either it's a, you know, reporter dropping in who's, you know, just going to report out the facts, you know, get a couple quotes and jump out, or even if it's a reporter like, you know, Greg Jaffe from the Washington Post, who came down for like several weeks, was coming down and hanging out in the second election. Still, like, things get collapsed into like convenient narratives, and you lose a lot of context. Like, for instance, like, how many people know that, you know, when JFK 8 opened up in 2018, there was a union effort. Like, there was a Chris Smalls before Chris Smalls. His name is Rashad Long. You know, he was They started in 2018. He was fired in 2019, almost like a year before Chris was fired. That was an RWDSU organized union effort. That's gotten dropped out, and those sorts of contexts are important. I'd say the third thing is the complexity of these things sometimes gets lost. So like it was very inspiring, and it's true that this is union effort led by people of color. It's a diverse group, but it's very important that it was led by people of color that are workers. But there was also like a very significant contingent of people who came to organize, and for particular personal reasons, Chris didn't want to talk about that. So that dropped out of the story for a long, long time. People didn't know that a third of the organizing committee were people who came to organize. I think it was an essential part of how we were victorious.
Okay.
It wasn't
All
the
right.
thing, but it was a thing, and
Okay.
it's I could talk about all kinds of complexities that get dropped out in favor of a smooth narrative.
And yet, let me just, so we can get some questions from the audience here. I mean, it's the best known
Sure.
organizing effort in America right now.
Sure.
Let me see if we can get folks here who are anxious to like query these three union organizers that we've got, because
Yeah, come on up.
No questions? I think it's true, though. Okay, as a writer, everything you say is totally correct, first of all, that complexity, collectivity, and context are almost always missing from not just labor stories, but like all stories. I want to say ad endum, because, as I said, it's correct, is that very often people who aren't like scholars or who aren't like deep in the weeds, who are just like reading something, they don't want complexity, collectivity, and context. They when they read like long lists of names, their eyes gloss over. When they have a deep history, their mind goes blank. It's something I struggle with so much myself. I'm writing a history of a political movement, and every time I give my pages to my editor, he's like, why are there so many names? Why are there so many names? Why is there so much context? So I would push back by saying that some of the reasons for the faults that you very accurately cite, they come from the pressures of the medium as opposed to simply our inherent superficialities.
I definitely agree with that. I don't want to blame journalists for that, but you did a great job of actually taking on a subject and not falling into those sorts of problems. And sometimes they don't. It doesn't need to be a long list of names. To point out that this was a organization led by people of color and workers who had a long time working at Amazon, and also had like a contingent of people who all came to organize, is a complexity that doesn't require more than one sentence. But it dropped out of most coverage until Mia Inouye took it up as the subject of an article, and she then sort of flattened it again, which was like, she said, oh well, they were all white college educated people, and I was like, well, JM, who was the secretary of the ALU, first secretary, was a young black college student who was assaulted, and you just wiped him out because it was inconvenient.
Because they want to have caricatures, right? There's like the white college educated organizers and then the authentic workers of color, and like the idea that you could have like, I don't know, like a black socialist who has a PhD is like beyond a lot of people.
Right, and it's unhelpful, I think.
No, I really agree with you, and I think that especially with Amazon, you're very right. And the real problem with that type of the simplistic narrative is it keeps people from learning, which is something that you were talking about the pedagogical function. It keeps people from getting usable lessons about how they can organize their workplace, or they can organize a warehouse, because if they think that it's just one great man coming in on on a horse and saving everyone, and that just isn't how things work.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the points that you brought up were pretty accurate. I, obviously did not do this by myself. Like, there was a lot of people, like even folks who started this effort with me who left, for, different jobs or whatever. And, it's like, it's a movement that you have to keep building and growing and keep making new relationships and deeper relationships with your coworkers, which is another really, I mean, it's a beautiful thing to happen in this work, even though it can be very difficult, and it is a struggle, that you have to, and it's a marathon as well. It's not like you win the election and it's done. So I think the collectivity part is really, really important to highlight, because it's never just one person. One person can't do it all. And also, it's funny that you mentioned the college-educated part. I have kind of seen that framework, and it's not something that I personally, care for too much, just because, like, I mean, I fall into that category, like I'm college educated, but my college education had nothing to do with, or like informed my organizing in any way. And another coworker of mine who does not have a college degree was extremely essential to the campaign, and we had, they're the only other person that was there on October 2020 and is still working alongside me right now on the organizing committee and the bargaining committee. So I think that flattening is something that it's just not that simple. It's not, I mean, yeah, there's just more college educated people nowadays, but that, I don't think there's a direct correlation between that and new organizing today. And that's all.
For the video.
Let me just ask a different question, if I may. My experience, I was on strike for 5 months in 1990, 1991 at the Daily News, and I never got to know people as well as I did on the picket line and in the union work that we did at the time. Was that your experience, Jocelyn, that you got to know the people that you worked with in a better way at that time because of the fact that you were engaged in this work?
Yeah, initially when we started our union campaign, we had a meeting to talk about the union, and we all gathered at like one person's house, and it just became like something where we started to know more about each other until that kind of thing was brought down and broken down by Starbucks. But even within the union and other organizing stores, I've met some really great organizers in the other Long Island and New York City areas, and even in Buffalo, I had talked to one of the organizers there, and recently we had a canvas of all the New York City Starbucks so that we could begin to organize those stores or whoever was wanting to. And I've met some great people from Seattle, from California, like Memphis, everywhere. So it really became like this way to connect with each other, and we all have relatable experiences, even though we don't all live in the same places.
You guys are going to pull this off. That's mine. I think you guys are going to win this. Claire, was that your experience, REI, too? Everybody got much tighter and they got to know each other and felt more cohesive?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, just that communication and working towards this larger goal, and kind of knowing that we were all kind of risking something, that really brought us closer together. And, not only did you have to really connect with folks, and there's a level of trust that goes into organizing a campaign, especially the first one, since we were the first location in REI out of their I think they have about 170 locations. But this being the first one to really take it to that point, we really needed to build that trust, and that involved, just seeing each other more, talking more, getting to know each other more, and yeah, and I
Part of my question, back to you in 1 second. Part of my question was inspired by listening to Molly talk about the taxi workers hanging out at midnight in the financial district and hanging out like, old friends and laughing and giggling, even though they're about to go on a hunger strike and not be able to eat for a long time. I mean, that's an amazing thing. At Amazon, how did that play out?
Yeah, I mean it was a huge part of Amazon. of the organizing drive, because Amazon is, it's particularly bad in the sense of alienation. The job is alienated. It's a 24-hour. These are 24-hour facilities, most of them. There are thousands of people working at JFK 8. Again, the 150% turnover annually. So it's unlikely that the people you meet when you first start are going to be there 8 months later. And so, people are there. They know very few people, other than the people around them, maybe. And they don't necessarily know them very well, because you get there. Some people, a lot of people are taking a bus, a boat, a bus, a train, 2.5 hours, 3 hours to get there, and then another 2.5 hours, 3 hours to get home. So people aren't hanging. There's nothing around there. It's in a wasteland. Most brilliant organizing tactic of all time. Got to hand it to the OG organizers, setting up the tent at the bus stop. And having it there every single day. People knew when they got off that bus that tent was going to be there, and we had it until late at night. We put up, we had bonfires even when the police came and told us, "What are you doing with the bonfire?" And that created a place, like a unique place in Amazon, where people could come and get to know each other and feel like human beings together. We got an key Amazon organizer in the crowd, Natalie Menares, was definitely instrumental in the campaign. We spent a lot of time getting to know each other around a bonfire at that tent, because there's nowhere else really you can do that at Amazon.
Just one question before we wrap up from the chat. Someone asked how they could support the RAI organizing campaign, and the question can be applied, of course, to how can people support the RAI organizing campaign? And same question can be applied to Starbucks and Amazon. What, if you were to meet someone for the first time, they're interested in this, what would you tell them in terms of how can they help?
I would first recommend to follow our social media account. We just actually posted a petition 2 days ago, I believe, and that was on Indigenous Peoples Day, kind of trying to hold RAI a little bit more accountable to the values that they spout. Keep an eye on our social media accounts. That's what I would recommend. When we have a call to action, it'll definitely be posted there for sure. And if you happen to go to an REI, maybe wear some, union yes, apparel or pro-union apparel. Definitely. It was a really nice treat to see members and guests come by the Soho store, just kind of giving us fist bumps and telling us that they support us and everything. So hopefully if a new location goes public, send them good thoughts and everything. That's probably the best way to support right now.
Well, I also agree with the social media posts. I know that Starbucks Workers United on Twitter has large, I think they just beat out Howard Schultz's follower count. But I think for me, it was really essential when customers came in and talked about the union and supported us, especially on days where it just felt like everything was just weighing me down and my manager was giving me a hard time. Normally it was the customers who came in and supported us, our regulars or people who weren't regulars. They came in, talked about the union. Some of them had union experience, and they just kept telling us to keep going on. So that is always helpful. And just going to other Starbucks that are not unionized yet, and maybe talking about the union, wearing union apparel, like you said. But and also there's a thing that we made up for the downstate region is the Regional Hardship Fund. It's money that's donated, from the public that is supposed to support people who were fired from the company for organizing. And there is a national fund, but this one is specifically for the downstate New York region. And if you could donate to that, that would be great. If not, it's okay.
I would just, it behooves me in my new position to shout out that there are many Amazon organizing efforts going on, and that it would be good to support any and all of them. So in addition to the ALU, which is, become the most famous one. Obviously, there's also right here in New York and also elsewhere in Chicago and California, all across the country. Amazonians United is a voluntary union that has not sought an LRB elections, but is doing really great work. Cause in North Carolina is setting up their own independent union, similar to ALU, but not affiliated with ALU. And they're amazing organizers. I feel a profound respect for them. There are a number of other organizing efforts going on. You follow those accounts. If they have newsletters, follow their newsletters. If you can donate to them, donate to them. If you need a job, you could work at Amazon and organize. That's always a thing. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have actual, interaction with customers, so you can't really do that. But I would say, especially, ALU gets a lot of attention now, and there are these other efforts that definitely also deserve a lot of support. So I would love for that. I'm in the middle of setting up a website. It's up, but it's a work in progress called AmazonWorkers.org. It's Amazon Workers Services, and it's to help Amazon workers both protect themselves from harassment and discipline by the company, and also help them start organizing if that's what they want to do. And on that page, on that website, there will be a list of all of the organizations that I have contact with and their contact information. So you can go to AmazonWorkers.org to see all of the different organizing efforts going on.
All right, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to Matt, Jocelyn, Claire, Tom, and thank you to Molly. Congratulations again to Molly for your incredible piece. Thank you all. This is a fantastic panel. And as I said earlier, I just want to very quickly, we'll plug Tamiment's collections, but the Tamiment Wagner collections only exist because of all of you and many others who are on Zoom or who will be watching this recording later. As Rachel said earlier, it's an archive, but it's also a public-facing one. And it only exists because people here for decades, in some cases, have supported this archive through their donations, through their time, through their hard work, through their support of Debra, during her more than 20 years here. And so I want to thank you all for that. And we haven't returned completely to normal yet, but our reading room is open. And so I encourage you all to visit us, review the taxi worker records that we have here. They have been here for years and we're the proud home of them. Bring your students here. We are open to classes from everyone, not just NYU. And learn more about, to borrow a phrase that Tom just used, more about the stories of strength, courage, and yes, victories. Plenty of stories of despair, but let's highlight the stories of the victories that workers have won in the past, and they will inform our future victories. So thank you all. Thank you all for fighting for a better world, and thank you all for being here tonight.